Hello, welcome to Catholic Reboot. I just want to make this quick segment to remind you at the bottom corner, you're going to see what appears to be a start button, a red start button. That's actually a subscription button, and it kind of looks like this. I'm going to put it right in my palm. If you can click on that to subscribe and also like the video, only because then it kind of promotes the podcast that much more. So thank you, and let's get into this next episode. Welcome to Catholic Reboot. This episode is titled Life After Death, right? Most people will say, do you believe in life after death? And the question has to actually be, what type of life after death? The life of the body or the life of the soul, right? So we know that our physical body cannot have life after death. It's ashes to ashes, right? It's the soul that has life after the physical body is gone. But what's really important to remember, and I think this is where some of the Catholics today have a problem with Genesis or explaining Adam and Eve or life itself, right? What we know as Catholics is that there is only one way life can be created, and that's from God, right? So even the scientists, if they want to clone or they want to mix something up, they can never replace God in creating life, right? And life in everything. So life in human beings, life in animals, life in plant matter, you name it, it all comes from God. Now, the other thing is, if you stop and think about the very, very beginning, let's go all the way back before the creation of the heavens and earth, right? There was God, right? All right. And let's even go before the angels. So before the 9 choir of angels were created, there was God. Now, imagine you look at God as this pure soul, pure spiritual soul, right? And once he decided to create angels, we all know that he had given angels free will. So, and we in previous episodes we went through all the choir of angels and how the very top, the seraphim, were the closest to God, so they couldn't possibly be disobedient. But all the way down from the seraphim, the different choirs of angels were pretty much taught on the way down from the choir above them, right? So that, though the seraphim, being so close to God, saw the pure soul of God and understood what God was, right? Now, this is theologically based, right? Because we can't actually go into Scripture and say that's where it says it. Now, if God was this spiritual, pure soul, when he created anything, right, and they say man was created in the image and likeness of God, let's be a little bit more specific. Where did the soul of man come from? Where did the soul of the angels come from? Because we know angels have souls, right? Well, they had to come from something, right? So God didn't just go, whammo, you got a soul. The soul comes from God. So imagine God piecing out part of his divine soul to the angels. And when he made the heavens and the earth and then made man, he pieced out a part of his soul, right? And so what's important to understand that is when we talk about life after death, all of our souls always existed. Always, right? Matter of fact, as kids, we used to see these kind of caricatures of a soul waiting, and then boom, the soul was being kind of infused into a newborn. Well, that's not too far from the truth. What's important to understand is that a soul is in the glory of God, right? The last thing a soul wants is to come to earth. right? Why? Because to be away from God is painful. It's very painful for a soul to be removed from God and come to earth. Now they're in the absence of the beatific vision. They say that, and you can see it in scriptures where the angel Gabriel will always foretell the period of time, right? When someone's to be born. And the reason is it actually takes the soul time to get used to the fact that they're going to leave God. So they need this kind of this gestation period to get ready to come to a human, right? All right, so let me pause there a second and let's classify souls. So we know there's a spiritual soul and then there's just a soul, right? Anything that lives has a soul. Humans are the only ones here on earth that have a spiritual soul. So when a plant dies or an animal dies, the soul dies with it. It doesn't have a life after death. It dies with the physical entity of it, right? But a human soul, because it's a spiritual soul from God, is always destined to return back to God. Okay? Now you may say, well, wait a minute. What if the soul is damned to hell? Okay. We'll get there, but we're not there just yet. So imagine when a baby is inside the womb of the mother, right? It goes through the 9 months, right? It is already separated from God. However, God is involved with that soul inside the woman's womb. Okay, so God's basically keeping that soul company, right? And then once the child is born, okay, God is not involved with that soul, and now it's the mother and father that are now taking that child on, and then, of course, trying to set examples, right? If you've ever heard someone, and a good friend of mine said she died, had near-death experience, and she said, it was so wonderful that I didn't want to come back, and I can't wait till I can go because it was so beautiful. Well, they say that when many people will say they saw a light, right? So they saw a light through a tunnel that they were going, and there was this great euphoria. What they think that is it's a reenactment of your birth. That if you have a near-death experience, what you're really experiencing is what happened when you as a soul were coming out for the first time, the light being the delivery room or the room, whatever, right? Now, if the soul has the desire to be united with God, this makes a lot of sense, because when anybody is living outside of God's precepts, right, they have this hole in them, they say. There's something wrong. They don't know what it is. Now, they could be an agnostic, an atheist. They could be fairly religious. But the soul is destined to be with God. No matter how much you try to shun it, the natural law is that soul needs to be with God. All right. Now, I don't want to go into damnation yet. I just want to cover that part, right? So we know that every soul is from God, right? All right. If you look in history, the first millennium of history, when God destroyed the earth with the flood of Noah, what was going on versus when the Tower of Babel happened, what was going on? All right. Well, the first millennium, the people in Noah's time did not have a problem with God. In other words, they did not go against God. What they did is they went against their own people, right? in essence, they just couldn't get along. And it was so bad that God finally said, well, if you're going to be in an earthly state, and earth was created for you, and you can't get along, I'm going to wipe you out, right? Why have you on earth if you're not going to do the one thing I put you here for, right? The second millennial is what? It was the Tower of Babel, when they actually were going against God. They were so intelligent, they say, that they had built this tower, and they said, we will never let a flood take us out again. We will control the heavens ourselves, right? So they were rebuking God, right? The first millennial, they weren't rebuking God. Second millennial, they rebuke God. Well, why didn't God just annihilate them for being so arrogant? Because they did not have a problem with their fellow man. They got along with their fellow man. So in essence, God says, well, I created man to be together on this earth, and they all worked very well together. They got along so well they could build this great tower, this great society, this great system. They were actually very brilliant. So what does he do? He confounds them and has them all speaking other languages. Why? So that they could no longer rebuke him and would have to split up and go off. And of course, that's where we come up with all of our languages, right? Now, why do I bring this up in this discussion of life after death, right? Well, we have to remember that God is always a perfect order, right? So what we may assume his reasoning is not necessarily true. And that's why I use the example of the first millennial versus the second millennial. What God is looking for man to do is to come into this life on this earth and earn the salvation to return the soul back to heaven, right? All right, now this is where it gets a little tricky, because you have to ask yourself this question: why did Christ, after his resurrection, and he had spent 40 days here on earth, he had told the apostles, don't touch me because I have not yet gone to my Father? So that's question number one. Question number two, why is it said that the Blessed Mother was assumed into heaven, body and soul? Okay, we have two examples of the body having to go back up to God in heaven. So you'd say, well, it's like this. Okay, so we know that when we die, the body just falls apart and it's over, ashes to ashes. However, on the resurrection, it's almost like reversing the tape. You know, if you ever took a video of an animal dying and then decaying, and you see it in fast speed, you see how it just goes all the way down to bones, right? We'll reverse that, and you'll see it coming back to a form, right? So upon our resurrection into heaven, what happens is the body and soul reunite, right? And the difference is this time the body cannot be destroyed. It is reunited with the soul, and it becomes a spiritual being in heaven, okay? Now, many people will say, well, is this why the church never accepted cremation? Well, yeah, but to be truthful, it's not that specific. It's not that body that was in the ground. It's the fact that there will be a body to reunite with the soul, right? But the church did take that position. Why would you destroy the body through cremation when very possibly God may want that body, regardless of the fact that it's decayed? God will reunite that soul with the body in that perfected form. So our understanding of the Blessed Mother's assumption into heaven, body and soul, is that the Blessed Mother didn't suffer original sin, so therefore she was in a perfected state, but she took her body with her, right? Christ was in his perfected resurrection, right? And so he took his body. And we always see pictures of Christ ascending into heaven, body intact. Blessed Mother assumed into heaven, body intact. So the idea of is there life after death? The real question should be there is absolutely life of the soul, because the soul is eternal, right? So when we see all the abortions that go on, what we have to realize is the devil is brilliant, because the devil cannot create life, but the devil sure can take that life. But the devil cannot take that soul, you see? So what the devil does is the devil wants to stick his finger in God's face and say, I know that's an immortal soul, and I can't touch that, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to jump in that womb while you're trying to guide that soul through that 9-month period, and I'm going to kill that body. It's just a way to wrestle with God, right? And yet we know the devil can't touch that soul. It's almost like a joke on the devil, because every time these abortions occur, it's almost the ringing of a bell of a new angel, right? That's an evil act that took out the body that the soul belonged to, and so where is that going to go? Well, it's going to go to heaven. It didn't do anything wrong. It's immediately a soul, right? So the question is this. So they'll say, well, the soul starts at conception. Truly, as a Catholic, we believe, no, the soul started before that. It was just the act of the mother and father that brought it in, you see? But that soul was there before. It's now kind of like sitting on the bench, right? Waiting, okay, I'm in. And boom, conception, soul's in, right? So because it comes from God, nobody touches that. All right, now let's go through the difficult task of the damnation of a soul. Now this gets tricky theologically, because if we believe that the soul comes from God, it's from God, it's God, right? How could anything that come from God ever be damned? Because by giving the soul into a human form, the soul will strive to be reunited with God, but the human nature of free will damned the soul. And I remember being on a retreat where the priest giving the retreat says, if this was a retreat for women, I would not tell this part because they can't deal with it. And what he said was, if you made it to heaven, but you found out your child was damned, you would be in perfect joy knowing God's justice. Well, people would say, how could I be? Because you know God's justice. In the same way that if a soul becomes damned, God releases it. Okay? So what is the damnation of a soul? It means that it never stops being a soul. See, that's the beauty of God. God is always one truth. That soul is just, it's not burning in hell from the physical fire as much as it's burning in hell from the emotion of losing the ability to ever see the beatific vision and be returned back to heaven. You see? That's the damnation. We give it a physical fire. The fire is the soul saying, I never will go back to my Creator. I'm damned, right? And the devil does that. The devil pulls these damned souls and wants to put his finger in God's face another time. So in abortion, he killed the body. But when someone is born and they're living a life that is going to lead to damnation, he then says, hey, I got one. He didn't get it in abortion, right? He tripped the wire too fast. But when he gets it at the end, when they live a life, then he can put his finger into God's face and say, I stole another piece of your soul. See? So, back to the question, is there life after death? There's always life of the soul. The soul never dies, ever dies, right? Even in hell, it doesn't die, right? So what do we do as good Catholics? We pray for the faithfully departed soul all the time because we don't know. We don't know, is that soul in heaven? Is that soul in hell? Is that soul in purgatory? Like I said before, if it's in heaven, our prayers for the faithfully departed will come back to us as a sanctifying grace. If it's in hell, once again, it'll come back as a sanctifying grace for our intention to want to pray for that soul. But if it's in purgatory, we're helping that soul get, as soon as possible, reunited with God to see the beatific vision. So, that's it. Thank you very much.